Hello. In today's programme, a quest to save our hidden cider orchard heritage using DNA testing.
We forget, perhaps in the heart of Devon, just how lucky we are. We are living in the Museum of Cider.
That's Barny Butterfield, founder of Sanford Orchards Cider. I joined him at the company's historic cider works in the mid-Devon town of Crediton, towards the end of a huge apple harvest.
We've got a beautiful pile of red-green Dabonet in the far bay. In front of us, a lovely mix, a traditional orchard, and so that will be more than 30 varieties, probably more than 40 varieties.
The apples waiting for pressing, especially in that traditional orchard bay, come in every shape, size and hue. And this diversity is a strength.
We will have 20 or 30 different varieties imparting particular flavour requirements that we have within our cider. So, gentle acidity and light perfume. Well, I can immediately think of 12 apples, which will give me that. In a typical year, not all 12 are going to have their best year. It could be about late frost, it could be about wind, it could be about pollination, but by having a diversity of them, guess what? I get my light acid and my little bit of perfume, and that's really important. So diversity is really, really important. And people have known it for a very, very long time. A very long time.
Are you taking a blend of apples then that are from old and new orchards and old and new varieties?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're probably pulling from about 500 acres of orchard. And those orchards are made up of 3 or 4 straggly trees around an old cob farmhouse. And they're made up of wonderful, linear, maintained orchards that would look more like a cross between an orchard and a modern vineyard. We line up these good strong trees, we put them in lines, and we're pruning and we're maintaining and we're foliar feeding, and we're doing all of them, those modern practices to give us great output and great quality, and at the same time huge acreages of organic orchard, trad orchard, because that's the patchwork that we're lucky enough to have. We forget, perhaps in the heart of Devon, just how lucky we are. We are living in the Museum of Cider. That is our county.
But a living museum.
A living museum, yeah, right. An apple variety survives as long as a tree survives. You know, if we don't have a living tree of that variety, it's gone.
But to keep that history alive, you need to know which trees are important. And a key to unlock that secret came in a project to preserve some other cider heritage, the work of the Long Ashton Research Station. This project was led by Emeritus Professor of Crop Genetics at Bristol University, Keith Edwards.
What my team wanted to do at Bristol is to identify all of the varieties that had been produced during Long Ashton's 100-year history. And the way that we did that is we developed a DNA fingerprinting procedure to identify the different varieties. And once we'd done that, we started to get calls from lots of people, from lots of cider makers, lots of people from the public to identify their apple trees. And one of those people was Barny. And so we set about fingerprinting, well, at the moment it's over 10,000 individual apple trees.
I spent my life looking at fruit and I didn't know what they were, because we've got these patchwork orchards. Apples they're swines, these trees. They'll tell you fibs with their fruit, because depending on how you prune that apple tree, depending on the ground that it's grown in, depending on if it's under an oak tree or in the middle of a field, the size of the fruit and how that fruit looks can change an awful lot. But genetics are genetics. What it meant was we could take conjecture out of it and we can start to be methodical, and what came about as a result of it and what Keith was able to discover was quite intoxicating. It was unbelievable.
We're heading down, I suppose, what you might call a back lane, but in the middle of town.
It's the old Saxon road to Exeter.
Is it?
Yeah, it is, but now it's an old lane because they decided the valley route was a bit faster.
Stretching up away to our left is the side of a steep hill. We're just peering into the winter sun.
These old trees, they are, at least 80 years old. This will have been a constantly replaced orchard, and I know that the tree that is having a little bit of a lean over, a little bit of a sleep, but it's still perfectly happy. When Keith's first fingerprinting round that we did. That is an unknown apple of which we have examples in multiple orchards. So in at least 4 or 5 local orchards, we're finding this completely unique marker. So not a tree from the catalogue. It doesn't have a name, but it's have a use. It's been in the ciders of the cider makers in this valley for, well, it's 80 years, but I'll nearly guarantee.
Morning.
Hi. I will guarantee that that's scores and scores of years older. It's a good, strong, vitty apple for this valley, and so it does well, grows well, makes good cider.
Keith, explain to me, if you would, how you go about DNA fingerprinting an apple tree.
Well, we take a small portion of a leaf, we extract the DNA, and we look at different sections of that DNA, its code, and that generates the fingerprint. It's very similar to the kind of things that the forensic scientists do to identify criminals. Each variety will produce a unique fingerprint, and we can use that fingerprint to identify trees of the same variety. And it is important to note what Barney said. We're not looking for a tree that has unique fingerprint and there are no other trees with that fingerprint, because that could just be generated from a pip. We're looking for trees that have a fingerprint that's not in the database, that's not in Brogdale or the Welsh Collection or wherever it might be.
And just explain what Brogdale is.
Brogdale is the National Fruit Collection. They have over 2,500 individual named apple trees. We fingerprinted those, we've made a database out of those, and so we can compare all of the trees that we fingerprint in Devon, Cornwall, wherever it might be, with Brogdale and all the other collections that we've looked at as well. This tree here that Barney's pointed out will have a fingerprint that's not in the database, but will be identical to another tree that might be 20, 30, 40 miles away. The only way that could have happened is at some point in the past, somebody has generated grafts from a tree to produce those separate trees. And they did it for a reason.
When you say it's been grafted, what is grafting it and what's the significance of that?
First of all, you'll have an apple tree that will have grown from a pip, so it will be unique. The Bramley would have been a very good example of this. Somebody then at some point noticed that first Bramley tree produced apples that had excellent cooking qualities. So what they would have done to propagate that, they would have taken shoots from that and they would have grafted, they would have joined them with a rootstock. And so from one tree they would have produced hundreds, if not thousands, of clones of that. That grafted material would be genetically identical to the original Bramley. And so nowadays you have the Bramley.
And what's in it for you, Barney, as a modern cider maker, if you like, to be delving into the past and delving into genetic oddities when there are so many established cider apple varieties out there that you could just go, well, that's a Dabonet, that's a Kingston Black, boom.
You've asked me a question that I could answer for the next 4 hours. Firstly, we had some really rubbish things happen in the 20th century, which really, really ruined what was quite a beautifully established order in the agrarian landscape. And they were war, and we lost human beings, men and women who understood the land, understood how fields behaved, and understood, the different varieties. Orchards would typically be looked after in parcels by individual people. I still pick from little orchards that are Ken's orchard and they're Polly's orchard. They would be looking after them. They were fiercely competitive micro cider makers. Go back a century and there were 20,000 registered cider makers in Devon. In Devon, not the UK. There's probably 350 cider makers in the UK now. 20,000 registered cider makers in Devon. Never mind your local flower show, this was competition. So people had their own varieties that they treasured and that would win at the local show. But if we get it right, these wonderful apples will remain and people will be able to make wonderful drinks. That's the real fun bit. Imagine being able to delve into an orchard and select a tree that no one knows the name of. It's never been identified for for probably 100 years, and we can make an individual cider from it. And we've done this, we've won prizes with these apples.
So what's next then? After you've identified the groups, are you then looking at multiplying those trees?
Well, of course, what Barny has done is made cider from those groupings and identified those which are of interest. If they have an interest, then they're worth preserving, and therefore they'll go on to be grafted, placed in multiple orchards, and go on for future generations to use.
Yeah, I'm already replanting. So working with the local nursery, we have begun the process of saving these trees as a library initially, because here's the problem with a tree, and you're going to get it real quick. They grow quite slowly. Keith and I will be long gone by the time they find out which of these apples that we think we found are the future.
Ultimately, flavour is what really matters. So it's into the cider works for an early taste of a cider from a previously unidentified apple.
This apple is not a collected apple. So Keith talked about ones where we've got multiples of varieties. That definitively proves they're not a seedling apple. Looking at the tree as I know apple trees, I know that it's a grafted tree. So and it's an old grafted tree. I'm going to uncork and I will pour this out, and we will find out. I put my nose in there and I have got aromatics off the scale, I have to say. This isn't a setup, Sarah, I promise you, it's not a setup. But the aromatics on that, now it is early. Some of that will be yeast. Yeah, no, I'm pretty chuffed with that. So good structural acidity. That's really great. Yeah, I really hate this. Sounds like it's a total setup, but I'm surprised because I haven't tasted it. Yeah, Devon was famous for Viner style ciders. So
wine style.
Wine style ciders. And that cider there ticks that box very, very neatly.
It's very light, very young. You could down it in one shot, but after it's been in the mouth for a few seconds, you start to get that tannin coming through. You start to get that flavour coming through.
I've just had a sip and it's really interesting. And I mean that in a good way.
Yeah.
Because it smells quite floral and perfumed, yet when you taste it, it's quite lemony and acidic.
Yep.
And it's a lot more punchy than it smells.
But you don't get aromatics like that on most cider apples. And by the way, all the ciders of the West Country have had these in. We're finding what was already there. We're not inventing something. The problem is if we don't research them, maintain them, then these will go and it'll be replaced only with pre-planned orchards of a very narrow number of varieties, and people will say the same thing that you hear our older generation telling us, well, these strawberries don't taste like they used to, and I'm sure I can only buy one kind of Swede now, and I can buy... Do you know what? It's because they're right. And so we're not going to sit asleep at the wheel. We'll make sure these trees are going to still be there. Having something that we know will be better by its diversity is all the reason we need.
And that's all from Farming Today at Sanford Orchards, with Barny Butterfield, Professor Keith Edwards and me, Sarah Swadling. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.